30 seconds.
Good morning, everybody. Larry says there are 30 seconds left before he begins his second presentation on the history of two countries in the Maghreb. I learned that I knew it, but it's good to remember. And reminder to everyone to silence your devices, and we will learn some more. Don't forget Maghreb, it's on the quiz.
Okay, hello everyone. We won't have a quiz today. We would do a little bit of review though. But just wanted to comment that someone came up to me last week and said, although she was interested, she thinks in a linear fashion, one thing after another. That wasn't exactly what we did because I was trying to look for some themes for topics that I thought would be unfamiliar to people. We will be more linear this time, and in the subsequent classes, certainly so. But I am aware of people's notions. So we're going to talk about things prior to the 19th century in Morocco and Algeria. And I'd like to start just by reviewing for about 2 minutes one of the things. This next slide we saw last week. It's how do you compare Morocco and Algeria? You know, where they say the Berber population in Morocco, 40 to 50%, that's an exaggeration. We're not sure, depends on who's estimating. It's probably 40%. And in Algeria, maybe a quarter of the population, and they are in certain areas, we'll see Kabylie again. Arabization, you know, often people think, oh, North Africa is Arab. Well, Arabs and Berbers have different histories, different languages, different customs, and it was, especially in the 20th century, an attempt to force through what we would call Arabization, although in Morocco, Tamazight, the Berber language, was made an official language in 2016. And in Algeria, there were protests, and Tamazight also is now considered one of the official languages of Algeria. There it is. Amizigh is the nation. Tamazight is the name of the language. The cultural identity, there is in both an ongoing tension between Arab nationalism and Amazigh activism, although it doesn't dominate, but it's there. And you know, in Morocco in particular, the monarchy has been looking for what they call unity and diversity. That's sort of something that we in the United States might try to strive for too. And then finally, currently, there are Amazigh cultural associations in Morocco, protests in the area known as the Rif, and we'll see the Rif a lot. And in Algeria, there's an autonomy movement in the area called Kabylie. And it's interesting that from the time of the attempt to make these countries into colonies, those are the areas that provided lots of protest. So we'll see in Morocco, there's the Rif War in the 1920s, and in Algeria, Kabylie in the 1830s, and again in the 1920s. And these are the estimates. As I say, the Berbers in Morocco probably exaggerate how many there are, but that's a number that we come up with. They live in these a lot of Berbers in the mountain villages, and they traditionally have been pastoralists, but it's still strong, although it's in decline for a number of reasons. One is people move to cities, and the other is drought. And here we have another image of a move from forcing more sedentary farming practices. Well, we also talked about Christianity in North Africa. And Nancy pointed out to me that if you're going to mention Christianity and St. Augustine, you probably should mention the Donatist heresy, as the Christian church called it. The Donatists were a movement within early Christianity. And remember that Christianity is still striving for some kind of unity in these centuries. It isn't as though the Roman Catholic Church sprang fully shaped even after these councils in the 4th century. So the Donatists said that the sacraments are valid only if the person administering the sacrament is pure himself. Well, that strikes at the heart of a hierarchy. The bishops and the priests, you're now questioning whether they are really eligible and what they're giving you is valid. And I call it here fundamentalist early Christianity, going back to what they saw the roots of Christianity. And it's widespread in just this area that we're talking about. I find it, there's another image here of Donatus Magnus, later on portrayed as a heretic. It says, Donatus Hereticus, but he was a bishop. The point that it's interesting to me is that this is the area that goes over to Islam without a lot of trouble. After the Islamic invasions of the 7th century, 7th and 8th century, it becomes Islamicized. And it sort of reminds me of Bosnia, where you have this Christian group that diverges from mainline Christianity. They get suppressed and then become open, in this case, here to Islam, and in Bosnia to Islam. Now, it just occurred to me that it doesn't happen in every case. There are other places where there are heretical movements that are suppressed and you don't get Islam, but it does happen in North Africa. And so were Berbers open to a new religion because of that Donatist background? Maybe, I don't know, I'm just making that up. So we have what's now the Kingdom of Morocco. He wasn't really a king until independence. He was called the Sultan, but we would consider that the monarch. But Morocco, as opposed to Algeria, has a long tradition of being an independent state or a group of states. And in the 20th century, the French like to proclaim it was not a colony, it was a, quote, protectorate. We'll examine that again. That's just words. It's clear to me that had independence not come, Morocco would have gone the way of Algeria as a colony with a strong Franco-Arab, minority dominating the society. The geography, as we mentioned, it's on the Atlantic. Here we are. Whoops, I don't want that. We see that? Yeah, here we are. On the Atlantic and the Mediterranean here, right at Gibraltar. So Morocco has that advantage of seaports on both waterways. It's got mountains. The Atlas Mountains play a big role in their history. And as I mentioned again last week, less so in Algeria. Algeria, the mountains are lower. Ironically, it created a problem for the water shortages of today, where it's harder to build dams when the land is flatter. So there are more dams in Morocco than in Algeria. But it also has these coasts. It has deserts down in here. Has, as I mentioned, Arabs and Berbers. And it's dominated by Islam, Sunni Islam. But we'll talk about what that means. Here's a picture of what some Moroccan nationalists at one time talked about as Greater Morocco, a kingdom that would cover parts of Algeria, Western Sahara, part of Mauritania, part of Mali. And for a short time, that sort of dominated thinking that that's a real recipe for war between countries. And if you actually, I don't know if you remember, of course, from last year, that when the Prime Minister of Greece came up with notion of a greater Greece, unleashed a major war with Turkey in the 1920s. So fortunately for Africa, they backed off of that. Morocco has a long history, going back at least to the Phoenicians. Here's an image of a boat of the Phoenicians, who are great sailors. They go back to the 8th century BCE, and skipping forward very quickly. In 40 CE, they are annexed by the Roman Empire. So begin to get, other kinds of peoples. And by the 4th century, they're Christianized with a significant Jewish population. So you have these mixed populations. You've got the dominant Berbers who are Muslim, but we have Christians and we have Jews in this area. In the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire, which considers itself Rome, as you know, it sees itself as that the continuation of the Roman Empire, and they claim domination. It's sort of hard to dominate a place so far away from the center. And then the Muslims come in the 8th century. Here's the present-day mosque in Fez, founded in the 9th century. So it's got a long tradition there. The Umayyad Caliphate was one of the earliest caliphates of the Muslims, and the Berbers sort of revolted against that caliphate. And what you get is a collection of small, independent Berber states in what we now call Morocco. And around 800, we get a native dynasty for the Sultan. And as I mentioned, you have the Islamic and Arabic culture in the towns and the Berber culture remaining in the countryside. And then we'll talk about this for a minute. Al-Andalus, which is Muslim Spain. Remember that the Muslims, who were great warriors, moved across North Africa and then took over most of Spain, which is Al-Andalus. And it has major implications for Spanish history. I just mentioned here that the current dynasty is called the Alawites, which is a little confusing, not to be confused with the Alawites in Syria, who are a dissident Muslim group. But that's just from the name, from Ali. All right, now we have, in the 7th and 8th centuries, we have all of North Africa that are Muslims. And what do people want there? I mean, why do you want to control what some people might say is a desert? Well, it's not really a desert. There's grain, olive oil, and trade routes going to the Mediterranean. And I got this map just to suggest to you that all along the coast, here's Morocco, here's Algeria, and Tunisia. This is not desert. This is agricultural land. There are currently water problems, but we're able to do what's called dry land farming, which means you depend on rainfall. But there's a lot of wheat production there. And the green stuff says these are major wheat farms to today. So geography and agriculture, the agriculture is sort of important for why do people want to control this area. So what are they raised? Just for your information, Algeria, there are these grains, barley, oats, and wheat. Morocco has corn, sunflower seeds, wheat, and rapeseed. I had to look up, what do you do with rapeseed? It's ground cover, and you can squeeze some oil out of rapeseed. You can get rapeseed oil. But it's not, it wouldn't be in our wildflower garden here. And then we're setting the background again about these Tamazight languages, where they're still there. And even take something like the Arabic spoken in Morocco, it's sometimes hard for Arabic speakers from other areas to understand it because it's filled with Berber words and some Spanish words too. So, we say Arabic, and Arabic is a written language. You can move across areas. As a spoken language, there are issues as you go from area to area. I think I mentioned that there was one of the residents here had a son-in-law who'd been in the Peace Corps in North Africa, and his language that he learned was Moroccan Arabic, and he became a translator for Arabic speakers from other countries. It was ironic. Okay, so what do you have, and how do you get this Arab Islamic culture? What does it mean? As I mentioned, there's this nominal Umayyad Caliphate in the 7th and 8th century, 661 to 750. That's one of the very earliest Muslim caliphates. But it's local Berbers who control the society. They're not, the caliphate collects some taxes, but not much. But in the 8th century, they go into Spain. And the Berbers from Morocco form the backbone of those armies that go into Iberia. Here's a picture of what the maximum extent of Al-Andalus. And you see it's all of what is now Portugal, almost all of Spain up into these various, up into the brown stuff. So if you can imagine Spain, I mean, Madrid is right about there. Lisbon is over here. But of course they don't exist at the time. Toledo and Granada later become important. First Muslim cities, later Christian cities. Before the year 1000, like any other dominant group, you have a challenge to Muslim unity, and you get the rise of a group called the Almoravids. Now, the Almoravids claim that Islam in Al-Andalus had declined, and they are going to revive it. It's a revival movement. Remember, this is an area, a time in Spain, which some people are calling a golden age in Spain. In fact, John Menecal is your cousin, I think, who wrote this book about how wonderful the interaction was among the Muslims, Jews, and Christians in Spain. Now, not everybody shares that opinion. I mean, there are other scholars who say it's way too optimistic, and she would respond, well, they're way too pessimistic. But there were great accomplishments of these various societies, and I don't have the name of the book on the top of my head, but The Ornament of the World. I recommend it very much. And it's a reawakened, at this point, reawakened Islam in Al-Andalus, which does not negate those intergroup activities. There's a sort of an image that they came up with, the multiculturalism, if you will, in Al-Andalus. And here's the legacy of their architecture. So there's wonderful stuff that comes out of that time. What was interesting, though, is that they're internal rivalries. And some of you may know the term Reconquista. The Reconquista is the movement among Christians to reconquer, that's the word, to reconquer Spain. What's interesting is that there are alliances between some of the Berber groups with some of the Christian groups. It's not as though there is this unified Berber Muslim group and a unified Christian group. Sorry, it threw me off. There are these intergroup alliances that make it very unusual, but there is still a relaxed interpretation of Islam among the Almoravids. Even though they say they want to go back to pure Islam, they don't come down really hard. And there's one of the images of this chessboard of the two communities. And they're generally tolerant of non-Muslims, and you find Jews and Christians in high positions in some of the areas. There's also a lot of poetry, philosophy, science in Arabic. It's interesting that some members of the Jewish community were important in translating from the Arabic into Latin, which is stirrings of what becomes the Renaissance in Northern Europe, in Italy and Northern Europe. This is an image of the Grand Mosque of Cordoba. It's quite a place, 10th century. That prayer hall is said to hold about 10,000 people. And I just focus on it because I did visit it. It's an amazing place. All those pillars are taken from other areas in the Mediterranean. They sort of stole from to construct this. And it's one of the few mosques that was not destroyed under the Reconquista. And in fact, if you go in there, you go down this long hall, and then inside the mosque, there's a cathedral. It's really an amazing experience to see that building in Cordoba. So if you get to Spain, I recommend it. Here's the bell tower in Seville. It was originally a minaret, for the call to prayer. And it's from the Almohad period architecture. Well, other Berbers thought the Almohads were not pure enough and they're too lax. And you have another group with a name that's confusing if you're not used to these words, the Almoravids, who rise in the 11th century. They're a coalition of Berber tribes. Starting around 1040s, they found Marrakesh in 1062. What they say is the Almohads are sort of degenerate. They've fallen away from true Islam. The Almoravids are competing with the Almohads, and they do move into Al-Andalus, and they have a major victory against the Christians in 1086. So holding back the Reconquista. Subsequently, they started losing territory. And now you may remember that the Reconquista is over a period of centuries that finally ends in 1492. That's the last victory of the Christians. But until then, you keep having these Muslim strongholds. The Almoravids were in some ways generally tolerant. You still could get non-Muslims. Jews and Christians are tolerated as people of the book. In Islam, there are three peoples of the book, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And Jews were valued as merchants, but they started to decline from their high positions in Al-Andalus. In general, the Almoravids are restrictive, but not bent on extermination. recalling, like the Christians after 1492 are bent on extermination. So here are some of the leftovers. These are mosque waterworks for ablutions, before entering for prayer. You need to wash your feet. A kiosk from the 12th century, and that's focusing here on the architecture. It's very interesting to see the stuff that has survived. And at the height of the Almoravid Empire, they controlled Morocco, the Western Sahara, parts of Algeria, Mauritania, and much of Al-Andalus. So again, we had the Almohads, and now we have the Almoravids, 1040 to 1147. And here is a picture of the extent of their empire. Going down here, this is Western Sahara and part of Mauritania, going up here to what's now Morocco. And over here, which is currently Algeria, and the southern part of Spain, Al-Andalus. You can see, if you look at Spain, it's already not so dominant Muslim as it was in the earlier map that we looked at. The Reconquista is moving south. Well, the Almohads, actually I gave you the dates before of the Almoravids. These are Almohads in 1121. They originate in the Atlas Mountains. They conquer Morocco. They take over Marrakesh, which was founded, recall we said, in the 11th century. And in 1147, they killed the last Almoravid ruler. And then they push into Spain. What they want is stricter adherence to a form of Sunni orthodoxy. So they're puritanical reforms, and they try to suppress practices which they call un-Islamic. That is, some of the traditions taken over from the Berbers that they see as deleterious to pure Islam. So once again, it's a fundamentalist movement backed by a very strong martial tradition. So they wanted to centralize religious authority. You have what's now the ulama, the group of scholars, and they reject, one of the things they had difficulty with is ascribing human attributes to God, anthropomorphism. That's what they really didn't like. They saw it occurring in the earlier versions of Islam. There were many forced conversions and expulsions of non-Muslims. And in Jewish history, there's this golden age where they participate in society. That's the end of that golden age. On the other hand, the Almohads are remembered for their architecture and actually for their learning too. It's a contradiction in a way, this puritanical attack on the old style, but yet they still fostered scholarship. Here you have the Kutubiyya Mosque in Marrakesh, founded in 1147, and in the foreground there are the remains of that original mosque. So it's one of the, Marrakesh is still a very popular center for people to visit because of the history. And here is another example of their architecture, a minbar where they give a sermon from the top there. And it's for the great mosque in Marrakesh. It's been partially restored. It's very impressive. We know that Muslim art does not have images of individuals, but they still have tremendous variety in forms and shapes, and you can see it there. Anyway, the Almoravids are finally completely defeated in 1147, and in turn, the Almohads suffer a major loss to the Christians in the year 1212. So that Reconquista is moving south. Well, the other dominant group, the Ottoman Empire. Remember, the Ottoman Empire goes back to the 14th, 15th centuries. It is Muslim, but it's not Arabic, it's Turkish. And it, in turn, dominates North Africa, but never quite succeeds in Morocco. Morocco is way off in the west there, so it continues to have that Berber influence. So what you get is a Byzantine frontier in what is now, well, Egypt, Tunis, Algeria, to what's a core region of the Islamic world. And the competition to the Ottomans is Christian expansion, especially out here in Morocco. So in the 15th century, Portugal captures some towns. And we mentioned Ceuta last week. That's still controlled by Spain. It's one of the last outposts of European imperialism in Africa. Ceuta, the other city of Melilla, we saw that on the map.
Could I ask a question about Portugal?
Can we get it on the?
She wants to ask a question about Portugal.
Yeah, since you're just mentioning it now, I was wondering, how does Portugal figure into the Reconquista or vice versa?
Well, without going into history of Iberia, it's the armies of the Christians come from both areas. And I don't know when the Portuguese language splits off, but it is, they're separated from Spain by some mountains, and you do get a different language, which is actually closer to Catalan than it is to Spanish. So that's all I can answer you right now. Okay.
I'll have to find out.
You have Spain here, going back, which has now become a colonial country in the area, and it grabs Oran, Oran, we don't have a map here, it's in western Algeria, Algiers on the coast, and Tunis. Remember, Tunisia is where Carthage was. So these are countries, they're not modern countries, so these boundaries aren't clear at this time. What happened is that the local Berbers called on the Ottomans for help against the Spanish. So the Ottomans then take over coastal Algeria while Morocco remains independent. So here you have a map. The red stuff is this Ottoman rule all along the coast, going here with Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt in modern terms. Morocco sits by itself. They can't control it. And then, of course, there's the Sahara Desert. Nobody controls that. It's nomads. Not so, even today, the control over the Sahara is a sticky issue. So by the 16th century, there are these three worlds of cultures and politics coming together. The Islamic world from the Ottomans, the European world, Spanish and Portuguese. Remember, the Portuguese at this time are great world navigators, and indigenous Berber traditions. So it's sort of creating this, what's going on in Morocco. And then I just want to mention this lasting Berber influence. Remember, the Almoravids and the Almohads are Berber dynasties. And here is just a review that the Almoravids are this striped area, which is Morocco, what's now Western Sahara and part of Mauritania. You can see the current day borders by that gray line. Going into Al-Andalus, the southern part, and along the Mediterranean coast. And the Almohads, who drop out somewhat of the Sahara, but here they are. They all across North Africa. And it's a Berber and Berber Islam. I do want to mention Kabylie or Kabylia over here, because it's a agricultural area and it's a home of tribes who are very difficult to conquer by the Ottomans, by the French in the 19th century, and even today, when you have unrest in Algeria, you're likely to find it in Kabylie. And we'll talk about that again. Investigation of Kabylie is what first made Albert Camus famous as a journalist. We'll get to that. The Sahara region, as you can imagine, is sparsely populated. There are Berber tribes. We talked about Tuaregs, but they don't figure much in this course. But today the Tuaregs are down here with their own form of Tamazight language. They're not mutually intelligible with Berber languages of the north. So these areas, Kabylie, mainly Kabylie, there's a series of anti-Ottoman insurrections. That's a pattern that gets repeated against the French in the 19th century. But what was Islam under the Ottomans? Sunni Islam is official. You don't have that split. But remember, Sunni Islam is not a monolith. I mean, they all hang together, but this is what's called kind of a tolerant Sunnism. And it uses what the Ottomans have as a millet system that says the ethnic groups, the Christians, the Jews, have their own communities with their own internal customs and laws. As long as they pay taxes, they are in good shape. That lasts for a long time. And we will talk a lot later about what is personal status, because personal status means what law you're subject to. It became a very serious issue in these countries as to who you are, what courts you go to, how are they expressed. There's this dhimmi status. The dhimmi means that these minorities have a inferior status. They're subject to certain customs and laws that for the dhimmis, but they're not oppressed as long as they know their place, if you will. At the same time, in the Muslim community, you have this flowering of Sufism, and I mentioned it last week. Sufism is it's not only in North Africa, I mean, certainly in Turkey today, but it flourished there in North Africa. It had unique spiritual practices that the imams weren't happy with. So here is a cover of a book in the traditional costume of a Sufi. We'll see that again in the next set of slides, because it's thought to arrive from the 12th to the 14th centuries, and they talk about the inner path of the individual complementing the outer path, which is how you pray and so on. So there's inner purity and the love of God, and there's a kind of, I'm not sure how you define what a mystical experience is, but it's not irrational, it's something in the mind. Prayer, remembrance, and guidance from a spiritual master. Here are what are called whirling dervishes. And they still have their ceremonies. I saw them in Turkey. And then there's something where there are these people called marabouts, who are holy men, who help a veneration of saints. And what the marabouts do is they integrate with local Berber practices. They get tied in with tribal networks, and these marabouts often move from place to place, leading religious activities. And there are various Sufi orders. So Sufism, again, is not unified. There are various Sufi orders. And there are cults of local saints, lots of pilgrimages to various places. And here, modern Morocco, a Sufi ceremony. So it's still alive. It's still important for a lot of people. And in Morocco, where the monarch considers himself, his official title, Commander of the Faithful. We'll get that again when we go talk about Morocco in the 20th and 21st centuries. He's still the Commander of the Faithful. And it supports Sufism as a moderate alternative today to what is radical and militant Islamism, because it's a gentler form. That seems to be a repeat of what I just said, but here's the picture is of a 1907 painting of an Algerian Sufi praying. And when you get to Marabouts, the man called Abdul Qadir, who is from the 1830s and 40s, is one of the great heroes of Algerian resistance to foreign domination. And next week we'll say some more about Abdul Qadir, but he's a Marabout. And he comes from Kabylie. And then a century later, Abdul Krim takes the Spanish and French 6 years to defeat these groups that are inspired by Sufism. So Sufism may be gentle internally, but they don't like being kicked around by central government and their practices, especially very often it's taxation practices that bother people. And here's another image of whirling dervishes. There are reservations from Sunni orthodoxy. The Sunnis say, first of all, you have to comply with the Sharia, the code of Islamic law. And they don't like the excessive veneration of saints. They say there are superstitions. And they claim that the Sufis focus on sort of esoteric knowledge, mystic knowledge, rather than the Quran. And modern Salafis, who are the people over in Saudi Arabia, really don't like the Sufis. They don't declare them as heretics, but they're on the edge of that. Well, we have the Ottomans in Morocco. We're trying to move forward. And there are various inroads made of the Ottoman control by Portuguese, Algerians, Ottomans, and then the Alawite dynasty, which is the current one, started in 1667, I think. They claim descent from Muhammad. There are a number of people who claim descent from Muhammad, and they have a special position in Muslim society. And that Alawite dynasty, again, don't confuse it with the Syrian Alawites, came to power in the 17th century. They were never totally dominant until the 20th century, but they kept resurging. Even when you get in 1912 establishment of French and Spanish protectorates, when you have the protectorate, the country says, "Oh, you're still independent," but behind the scenes, the imperial powers control the place. So the Sultan stays, although the French actually deport him for a while in the 1930s, I think, and then they were forced to bring him back. Here is Sultan Muhammad V, 1934, wearing what is this traditional Moroccan Berber cloak. You see it even today. You see various pictures of King Muhammad VI. Sometimes he's wearing a coat and tie, and sometimes he's wearing this, I think it's called a jalabia. It's a traditional cloak. It's strange to see it at first. Whole crowds, everybody wearing this same thing. He became the head of the dynasty, became a king in 1956, from sultan to king. And the current king, as I said, is Muhammad VI. He's the I think, great-grandson of this Muhammad V. All right, we're getting into the 18th and 19th century, and we have the Barbary pirates. And as we mentioned, Barbary comes from the word Berber. They are good sailors and pirates in the 17th and 18th century, preying on the shipping in the Mediterranean. They're sort of tolerated by the Ottomans because they pay their taxes to the Ottomans. They pay them off. It's the Western powers. But they were active all across North Africa, Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia. Here's this 1650 painting of a pirate. They were on galleys, big rowers. And here's a contemporary picture of their captives. They took a lot of slaves when they captured these ships, as well as their cargoes. Well, in the early 19th century, even though Thomas Jefferson called for no armies and no military stuff, he still helped, supported the development of a navy, and we have these Barbary wars where eventually they defeated lots of the Barbary pirates, and they're totally suppressed after the French come into Algeria after 1830. But it is a Berber tradition, and it's worth remembering. Well, the word comes from, the old Greek word talked about the barbarians, meaning the strangers, came the Berbers, and then the Barbaries. Here's a picture of the French bombardment of Algiers in 1830. This is when they first invaded Algeria, and this was the end of that Barbary pirate control. I'm going to jump forward for a minute, and we'll come back in time. The word dahir is decree, and in Morocco there's a decree, Berber dahir of 1930, which the French used to divide Berber and Arab Muslims. What they're trying to do is weaken Islamic judicial authority. Remember this whole notion of internal law and personal status. And according to the modern nationalists, this is a catalyst for Moroccan nationalism, this anti-Berber dahir. And I'm not going to read that whole thing, but I highlighted it. It's a defense of what the French tried to do. They say, sort of hard to read from here, a thorough examination of the decree's text in both French and Arabic reveals no explicit or implicit indications of racial discrimination. Sure, this is this patina of equality. And then they say the application is not tied to Amazigh identity, but rather to the observance of Amazigh customs. So again, the French don't give up easily. I mean, they're still in control in the 1920s and 30s, and it's not a nice control. But I bring this up to show that the traditions of the Berbers still remain strong. They're not wiped out. Finally, what is personal status? It's really a big issue. Heavily birth, marriage, and death. I should throw inheritance in there too. And it's applicable to both Morocco and Algeria. The Berbers wish to continue their customary law. The Muslims have their customary laws, and then there's French or Spanish civil law. It might be easier if you think about our own society. We have a civil law. It says, for example, if you want to get married, you get a civil marriage license. You can go and have whatever else you want to have, but you still need that marriage license. That's the kind of thing that would be very difficult for the people in these societies. And that's a simpler example. And when it comes to inheritance, it's really a big issue. And women are really subordinated in those traditional situations. Now, here you have Sharia, which is Sharia laws. Well, like other law codes, it's not exactly the same for everyone, depending on who's enforcing it. So you'll see on the left side, their primary sources are from the Quran and al-Sunnah, the practice of Muhammad. But then there are other sources on the right side where you have legal scholars who make detailed understandings from the Quran. I mean, there are always questions that arise. For a long time, the university in Cairo was the place where you went to get the interpretation, but sort of all over the place, you know. Saudi Arabia has its own claim to be understanding what Sharia is. And so in the United States today, you have especially anti-Muslim people talk about Sharia as some horrible thing. It's a lot of things, depending on who applies it. And I just give you that chart just to give some example of the variety of ways that this can be applied. And as I say, marriage, divorce, inheritance, and guardianship. So in these societies, if you get married, the husband is the guardian. And the Sharia for Muslims is maintained under the French protectorate starting 1912, and in Algeria from 1830 on, because the French make a distinction between the Europeans and the others, whom they call Arabs, but it means also Berbers. The Jews maintain their dhimmi status, and they have their own rabbinical courts. So this is just another group, a significant group in Morocco. And the Jews have their own rabbinical courts. They emigrated en masse in the 1950s. The Christians continue to have their dhimmi subordinate status. And as I mentioned, this civil law, they attempt to apply, not always easily, certainly it applies to the Europeans. Well, what happened in Algeria? In 1984, it came out with a family code, which is based on Islamic law, and provisions in it are considered discriminatory against women. And you don't have women in Algeria speaking out so easily, but here you have a case of current demonstrations. And here's a 2005, women can choose their own marriage guardian. They still have a guardian, but they have a little more freedom. There are significant restrictions on women. That's not just Islam, it's also Berber. Even it's stronger among the Berbers probably than among the Muslims with the Islamic law. In Morocco, they have some improvement of women's rights. It's challenging to implement that, especially in rural areas. In the cities, women can progress more. And what's interesting, if you look at this demonstration in Morocco, that's one of the images that shows men involved in a demonstration for women. You don't see that in Algeria. And so that for all the limitations of laws and customs in Morocco, it is closer to what we see as a society of equal status. It's not there completely, but it is further along. To me, that was just striking when I saw that picture. Well, when the French came to Morocco, the Sultan is the central authority without the Ottomans. Here's a famous painting by Eugène Delacroix. It's in Toulouse. The Sultan of Morocco leaving his palace, 1845. Just an interesting painting. From 1600 on, French had commercial treaties, but no territorial control in Morocco, whereas Algeria had this Ottoman theoretical control. After the conquest of Algeria, Morocco becomes a direct neighbor of Algeria. And initially, and we'll talk about the War of Conquest next week in Algeria, Morocco supported the Algerians. They saw as brother Berbers and brother Muslims. And there was a brief war between France and Morocco in 1844. The Moroccans were soundly defeated and pulled back. And here we have, later in the century, the Sultan of Morocco. You know, he's wearing that traditional cloak in that picture. But there's no military occupation in Morocco by French, by the French as there was in Algeria. So in the 19th century, you don't get any flow of settlers. I think what you would find, starting in the 1920s, Morocco started to look more like Algeria in the terms of immigrants, but it didn't last as long. Okay, just to summarize this, we're coming that Morocco has an independent sultanate and Algeria has a regency. This is pre-1830. The Europeans in Morocco are interested in trade. In Algeria, they're exerting military pressure. The French control, they invade Algeria in 1830. Excuse me. And then you have this so-called protectorate with nominal independence but actual control by the French, whereas in Algeria, definitely controlled by the French. Here's a picture of Moroccan clothing in the 19th century. On the left is the jalaba, still widespread, and various other uniforms, some of it stylized. But I thought it was interesting to look at the native costumes that are give you just different from what we see in the Western Europe. Well, it's 2 minutes to 12, so we have just a few minutes if people would like to make some questions or comments.
Just a question about all these changes in leadership in these countries. I mean, you went over many centuries and you said it changed from this identity to another. Were they the result of military operations? I mean, it couldn't have been all,
Yes, it was not peaceful.
Okay.
I mean, for example, when the Almohads took over from the Almoravids, what you do is kill the Almoravid ruler and you sack Marrakesh. When the Ottomans come in, they send in their soldiers. They're tough. And what we will find is that eventually the Moroccans turn out to be pretty tough soldiers themselves. And they play a big role, well, as I say, war against Spain in the 1920s. The Moroccans and Algerians supply hundreds of thousands of soldiers in World War II. They're tough. And there are independence movements, particularly in Algeria. The French never were able to defeat them.
We are all concerned about climate change, and I'm wondering whether or not there are any deleterious effects in the Sahara Desert, one way or the other, that are attributed to climate change.
Well, there is a major league drought all through Africa. So, not caused by the Sahara, but the Sahara in parts is expanding because of that lack of water. It's a big problem. Both the Moroccans and the Algerians have invested in desalination, but that's a very expensive and long-term project.
what were the French after in these two countries? Some resources that they had, or
Well,
something else?
it's a good question. They were after resources. They were after commercial ties. Remember, there was that agriculture which they wanted to dominate. We saw that. They, in Morocco, well, Algiers they just took over. In Morocco, they got a series of treaties that gave special treatment to foreigners. In the Ottoman Empire, they called it capitulations, that is sort of foreign control. And what happens is they're carving out the economic areas that they wanted. So it's a combination, not just economic, but there's this notion, especially France has its civilizing mission, they claim. It's a kind of hypocritical. They want to control these areas. So the whole idea of what is the impulse behind imperialism is food for thought for a long time, but it is economic, it's political, it's grandiose in many ways.
Maybe one more?
Well, okay, well, we're good on time. Thank you for attending.